Well, welcome everyone to the Eastside Freedom Library and our monthly labor history film program. As you probably know by now, we try to contextualize each film by having a conversation with a scholar, activist scholar who's engaged the materials that the film is about. Tonight's film, Up South, made by the American Social History Project at the City University of New York, explores African-American migration from the South to the urban North in the first 3 decades of the 20th century. And tonight I have with me my old friend James Robinson, Dr. James Robinson, who has a PhD from the University of Iowa, where he's worked in Black intellectual history and the development of the field of Black studies. James has been working at the Center for Social Solutions at the University of Michigan, also did some work at the Smithsonian, and is beginning a position, lucky us, beginning a position at Metropolitan State University here in St. Paul. James and I have also connected over his work on the history of dining car waiters, a lesser known but very significant group of workers on the railroad who have often been overshadowed in both African-American and labor history by the stories of Pullman sleeping car porters. And we're still eagerly awaiting James's book or public history projects on the dining car waiters, who were a very significant part of both the labor movement and the Black community in St. Paul and Minneapolis. So welcome, James. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Peter. It's good to be here.
Great. It seems to me that this film and our conversation, and a conversation that we will continue with you on Tuesday night, the 22nd of September, in our monthly labor history reading group, when people will have read your extensive essay on dining car waiters in the first decades of the 20th century. That there are, it seems to me, at least 4 significant interwoven themes. The theme of migration, which tonight's movie explores. The theme of Black intellectual history, that is how African Americans in different parts of the country and in different social and economic milieus developed their own ideas. The specific history of dining car waiters that you have been researching, and the question of the relationship of African-American migrants coming from the South to both the recomposition of the American working class in the 20th century and the development of the American labor movement in the 20th century. So I thought we might start tonight with exploring how you see ideas traveling along with migrants from the South, how these ideas get transplanted into cities like Minneapolis and St. Paul, and how these ideas flourish or not within African-American communities.
Thank you, thank you. Oh, Peter, it's an interesting film that you all are about to look at. It tells a story of migration, but not the story that I'm looking at. The story of dining car workers is one that not many people know about, as you were saying, but it's an important story for a number of reasons. One, it introduces Black workers in the Midwest. It introduces Black workers not only as labor, but as having a workers' culture that is full of both material culture as well as ideational culture, if you will, or expressive culture. And it also shifts, I believe, or begins to shift the story of migration from a up south, a northern story of migration to a western story of migration, even though St. Paul is on the east side of the Mississippi River. It's a part of the Twin Cities, which includes Minneapolis. So St. Paul, Minneapolis is often referred to as the Twin Cities, or is known as the Twin Cities, especially locally. But Minneapolis is on the west side of the Mississippi River. And the thing that this migration story tells is the way in which St. Paul and Minneapolis are a gateway to the greater Northwest, and the migrations that go from the South and then turn westerly. Um, but the piece that dining car workers, I think, are especially helpful in understanding is the fact that their culture, this workers' culture, the culture of dining, the culture of cuisine, a domestic culture that is done by males and not by females, is an interesting story in the way in which we now can rethink both Black history, but also labor and working class histories, because it's telling a story of men, predominantly men, who came to the Twin Cities, worked for the Great Northern or Northern Pacific Railroads and other railroads that came into the Twin Cities, because St. Paul was a railroad hub. And so many of the trains that came from Chicago, let's say, came through the Twin Cities and then went to Seattle and Oregon and places in between, but also to Omaha, Denver, and Oakland, and places in between.
Go ahead, please keep
in,
going. Yeah.
in this story, I think what I've seen is not only are dining car waiters and cooks particularly important to Black Minnesota history, because at one time, I'd say, I think about 25% of all Black males in St. Paul worked for the railroads. And that doesn't include those Black males who worked for the Pullman Company, who were Pullman porters or Pullman car cleaners, right? But just railroad workers, right? 25% of Black males in St. Paul around the turn of the 1900s worked for the railroads. And most of those who worked for the railroads worked as on the dining car. The dining car was a particularly important industry within an industry, right? And so, whereas waiters have a tradition, dining car waiters have a particularly unique tradition. So in the migration of African Americans to the Twin Cities, at least, it's richer and deeper than many people understand, right? And that course stems from both my understanding of dining car worker culture or Black worker culture, as well as my understanding of Black intellectual history. And I think the two are combined, right? And they combine because, as W.E.B. Du Bois once said, you need to study Negro ideas and Negro ideals, right? Not simply studying the Negro, but studying the way in which men of color looked at the world, thought about the world, engaged the world, and had to transform their world in order to make a better life. And this migration of ideas is something that, again, comes to the Twin Cities. Even the fact that W.E.B. Du Bois, right, traveled and lived for summers in the metropolitan Twin City area, you know, engaged with Frederick McGee, who was a local Black lawyer, resident of St. Paul. And together, they start the Niagara movement. In fact, Du Bois credits McGee as being the inspiration for the Niagara movement. And then the Niagara movement turns into the NAACP. And of course, that history is still unfolding, let's put it that way.
Mhm.
But evidence is suggesting that rather than thinking of waiters and cooks as menial work, these were highly skilled crafts,
Mhm.
right? And with the craft came a culture, and with the craft of cooking comes a cuisine based upon the experience and training of the cook. So yes, I think it can safely be argued that Black cooks brought with them a cuisine that was influenced by African American cultures writ large, whether that's from the US South or from the Caribbean, and the influences in tastes, seasonings that come about out of that. So there is unverified anecdote
Mhm.
that it was using the terminology of the time, a Negro chef who during World War I invented the fast rising biscuit that General Mills then popularized and made money off of fast rising biscuits. One of the dining car employees union leaders writes about the ability of a Black chef to make what is not is, right? I mean, it's a beautiful expression of people now say making something out of nothing, right?
Right.
But making what is not is was the ability for cooks and chefs on dining cars to have to create out of the ingredients that were at hand a meal that was not only palatable but also flavorful and tasteful.
Yeah. So for those of you watching, if you'd like to, pardon the pun, sink your teeth more deeply into this subject, make plans to join us on Tuesday the 22nd when we will be discussing a major paper that James has written about Black dining car workers. I want to just, as we're running out of time before we're going to roll the film, I just want to ask one more question, sort of taking this as a kind of microcosm, this issue of the knowledge that's embodied in foodways. When I studied and taught immigration history, I would like to say that every group of immigrants, even if they were poor and had little material belongings with them, brought substantial suitcases full of material culture with them. The migrants whose stories we're about to look at in this film tonight, who left the South in many cases, fleeing sharecropping, fleeing debt peonage, fleeing lynch mobs, unable to carry much of material value with them, brought with them, as James said, quoting W.B. Du Bois, ideas and ideals. These railroad workers, dining car workers are part of that story, as are many others. Do you want to just add one last point, James, about the ideas that migrants brought with them from the South and the role that they played in impacting life here in the North?
Well, you know, one of the things that I think is particularly important, obviously, given the history of slavery in this country, is the idea of freedom, but not simply as an ideal, but as a practice. And that practice of recognizing that freedom meant something to the emancipated slave, and in many instances, but in particular in the Twin Cities, that freedom was an intellectual freedom. The idea that in order to be free, one had to be able to read and write in order to control one's destiny. So that not only were these dining car waiters and cooks skilled workers, skilled craftsmen, if you will, and had a skilled trade, because, for example, there were dining car cooks or chefs who not only cooked on the train, but also started their own catering business when they were on the ground, what they call on the ground, at home, not on the road, not on the train. The thing that we discover in looking at these men more closely and more in depth, and this I got through doing oral interviews with retired dining car waiters, cooks, and stewards, African-American dining car waiters, cooks, and stewards, was their insistence on reading the newspapers from wherever they went. One man told me that he always read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, as well as the local, whatever the local paper was. But this carries over, and this I think shifts our image of the working class, right? What is it? It's been a while. His last name is Rose. He wrote a book called The Mind of the Work, The Mind. I can't.
Rose. I know who you mean.
Yes. One of the things that he, building on the works, of E.P. Thompson, and others, shift our understanding to looking at culture, the workers' culture, working class culture, or as I say, workers' culture, as the realm in which men and women who labored not only had issues around their status as workers in a capitalist economy, but also expressed themselves through song, through poetry, through other expressive means that we call culture. In the Twin Cities, by the turn of the century, it's said that we had one of the most educated Negro populations in the United States, or the most literate, if nothing else. That something like 94% of all Black folks who lived in the Twin Cities were literate. And that is not the image that most people have of African Americans, or considered that by some within the culture. But in fact, they were developing a unique culture, a workers' culture, comprised of not only the railroad workers, but the postal workers, the packing house workers, the agricultural workers who worked in trunk farms outside the Twin Cities. But St. Paul became this cultural hub, and then later Rondo neighborhood became the scene of this workers' culture that I call Rondo workers' culture that develops after the 1920s.
Great. So we're going to get on to the movie. James, you've both widened and deepened our understanding in this one conversation. There's so much more for us to learn. This film Up South is going to give us another part of the story. Join us, as I said, on the 22nd for a deeper conversation with James about his research into the stories of African-American railroad workers, dining car workers in particular. After you watch the film, or as you're watching the film tonight, we want to encourage you to type in comments and questions on the Facebook page or the YouTube page. We'll try to respond to you. In this weird stretch of this pandemic and virtual communication, we're trying to be as interactive as we possibly can be. We all hunger for the day when we can be in the same physical space together. So thank you for tuning in, Dr. James Robinson. Thank you so much for dropping some knowledge this evening, sharing some of this with us. I'm sure you'll all enjoy watching Up South and continuing to learn about the history of the American working class.
There's trouble here, trouble everywhere. There's trouble here, trouble everywhere. Lord, I would go home.
My people have been forced to move from place to place, kidnapped from Africa, sold to the deep south, families split apart, always moving on. After we won our freedom, we started to make a new South, a place where we could live free, own a few acres, and settle down with our kin.
Ever since my dear old mother, yeah.
But freedom sure was hard to find. They stole our land, our labor, and even our vote. But you can't rob a person's belief or their will to keep fighting on, even if it takes moving to a new place.
Trees have been my bed. Trouble.
We moved all right to Chicago, the promised land, land of hope. But what's dreamland to some is dreaded land to others. You'll see.
But there's trouble over there. Trouble over there.
Oh, I thought Chicago would be heaven on earth. We all did. My boy CJ got so he couldn't sleep at night thinking about the big city. We left Hattiesburg in 1917. Pappy come to Hattiesburg for the mill work, but he ended up doing better cutting hair. You could lose a finger or an arm just like that in the sawmills. Downtown, they had their businesses and churches. Turn off Pine, and you come into the colored neighborhood where we had our own business folk. Mobile Street and beyond was all colored, with so much coming and going. I picked up where Pappy left off, with my very own Hattiesburg barber and shaving parlor.
My people sharecropped for Mr. Williams just outside of Hattiesburg. We didn't have a whole lot of money, but we did have a lot of what we had. Papa raised everything we ate, even to the hogs, chickens, corn so that we can make our own cornmeal. Didn't have to go to the store too much. Along about April, Mr. Williams would say, "Is your cotton getting ready to crop?" Come October, it'd be all picked, and just as sure as you living, he'd be calling it his. My cotton, my corn, my crop. December was settlement time. He'd tell us our debts and the interest. Then he'd tell us how much cotton we'd bale and what he'd pay us for it. And sure enough, he'd say, "You're still $100 in the hole." And if you got wise and complain, they'd run you out of town, burn down your home, or lynch you. Now that's just as true as I'm looking at you.
To those of my race who depend on bettering their condition in a foreign land, or who underestimate the importance of cultivating friendly relations with the Southern white, I say, cast down your bucket where you are. Cast it down in making friends with the people of all races by whom we are surrounded.
In the North, they have legal protection, and in the South, they have not. Not Booker T. Washington, not even God himself can move them away from that.
The Negro loves the South, but he does not love the white man's South. For years, he has been made to feel that he is only tolerated. He feels that the boll weevils and floods are God's agencies of deliverance from a system of agricultural bondage, in some respects more despicable than slavery.
Before leaving the South, let the Negro know that the North is no asylum. Let him know that the sun does not shine on a spot of United States soil where there is no prejudice.
This is what lynching really is. An excuse to get rid of Negroes who are acquiring wealth and property, and thus keep the race terrorized. There is only one thing left that we can do: save our money and leave a town which will neither protect our lives and property nor give us a fair trial in the courts.
Black labor is the best labor the South can get. No one else would work under the same conditions. If the Negroes go, where shall we get labor to take their places?
The North is no paradise, but the South is at best a system of caste and insult, and at worst a hell. Brothers, come north.
How are you all this morning?
Just fine. The South was ringing with the news from Chicago, telling of the wonderful openings for colored people. And I wasn't alone in my curiosity, no sir. It seemed like everybody felt the same. I dreamed of packing up my sister's girl Willa and making my way north too.
My friends all gone north and been replaced by backcountry people, strangers.
What we called traveling clubs was springing up like wildflowers, folks wanting more information and sharing it. At church, we sang about it, talked about it, and started making our plans. Migration fever was burning, and that Negro newspaper from Chicago was our trusted messenger.
Go on, Clara, tell the Defender about us.
Dear editor, I read every word in the Defender. It is my heart's delight.
And Clara, say we want more news about the Northern Drive.
Hush now, let her write.
I am asked so much about the Great Northern Drive on the 15th of May. Will you kindly tell me what is meant by this?
Say we're working people with families, but we can't hardly live here.
That's right.
So many women here plan to go north on that day. So please kindly answer.
Say we aim to go so far from here, it's gonna cost $5 to send a postcard.
Yours for success, Clara Robinson.
And friends.
May 15th just came and went. Nothing special happened. People was leaving all the time.
One day a representative of Northern Industry came by. Said he was anxious to get Negroes to come north and work. Said the North had freed the slaves, but left them in the South where they had not received good treatment. Said the North had a lot of jobs now the war was going on. That man struck a chord in me. Yeah, I had the Northern fever, and only the waters of Lake Michigan could cure me.
This, I want to come north where I can educate my 3 little children. I run a gauge edger in a sawmill. Now, if you cannot fit me up with what I'm doing down here, I can learn anything anyone else can.
White folk sure were burnt up about losing their cheap hands. Those that wanted to leave had to be crafty. Sharecropper on Bill McGuire's plantation planned his leaving carefully, telling the overseer he was taking his whole family to the circus. Couple of girls down in Purvis sported some overalls and hopped a freight train. CJ, turns out, just enlisted in the army. Group of my clients pooled their money to sneak out of town after dark. I got them the club rate on the Illinois Central. They didn't get but pennies for their land and belongings. Aimed to get jobs replacing soldiers up north.
4 times it's getting harder. Money gets scarce. As soon as I get my cotton and corn, I'm bound to leave this place. I'm tired of this Jim Crow. Gonna leave this Jim Crow town.
Of course, most folk down south didn't leave. It only seemed that way.
Doggone my black soul, I'm sweet Chicago bound.
Plenty stayed to mind what we built up right here. Wasn't it all easy for mothers or fathers to part from their children, their neighbors, their land? But folks just got tired. Tired of Jim Crow. Tired of saying yes and being ground down into nothing by crackers or hard work, or both at the same time.
I'm tired of the Jim Crow. Gonna leave this Jim Crow town. Doggone my black soul, I'm sweet Chicago bound.
America's Georgia. 50 members of the race were arrested last week when they attempted to leave for cities in the north and east. The arrested men were brought back and held, pending investigation and legal actions to stop the wholesale migration of Negro workers. Chicago Defender.
Why does the Negro leave the South? Indeed, you would feel a large part of the answer if you could be on this train, in this Jim Crow car, and share for one night the longing of these people to reach the line that divides Dixie from the rest of creation.
As soon as I got on that train, I felt free. Sure, I was sitting in the Jim Crow section up front where all the coal and dust rose up, got in the windows and ruined my clothes. But the chugging of the train couldn't hardly keep up with the beating of my heart.
Just behind us is a car for white people, where they can stretch out and rest their heads. They have paid exactly the same fares as we have. Some of these colored men are in the service of the United States, summoned from the far corners of Texas to fight for democracy in Europe. This is certainly a good preparation for trench warfare.
We were hoping we'd see the Mason-Dixon line. I thought it would look like a line of trees with some kind of white mark in the middle. Then someone said the bridge ahead was it. We were north now.
In Chicago, there were no signs that said color folks on one side, white folks on the other. When we got off the train, everybody went through the same door to the same waiting room. There was no sneaking in the back way to Chicago. The station was beautiful, but noisy and frightening too. Either you found someone you knew, or you went to one of the organizations that helped settle newcomers. Right near the station was the Loop, Chicago's white business district. And if you went east, it was all Lake Michigan, so huge it could be an ocean.
It was strange to pause before a crowded newsstand and buy a newspaper without having to wait until a white man was served. And yet, because everything was so new, I began to grow tense again. I knew that this machine city was governed by strange laws, and I wondered if I would ever learn them. Richard Wright.
Dear Mama, when I got on the streetcar and saw colored people sitting by white people, I just held my breath. I thought any minute now they would start something. Nobody noticed. Now, you know I'm not crazy about mixing with white folks, but if I have to pay the same fare, I want the same accommodations. This is a real place for Negroes. I miss you terribly. Willa.
To my dear friend, if I had the money, I'd go back south and dig up my father's and mother's bones and bring them up to this country. I am 45 years old, and these 6 weeks I have spent here are the first weeks in my life of peace and comfort. And if I can't get along here, I mean to keep on going. But no matter what, I'll never go back.
Chicago was something else again. You could go to all kinds of places. Stores, parks. Don't have to look up to the white man, get off the street for him, or go to the busted roost at shows. Our children could get a real education. But as to where you lived, well, the promised land was just as Jim Crow as Mississippi. Down here is where the complexion began to change. To the west of Cottage Grove is a solid black belt until Whitworth. Trashy old houses and rooming is all we newcomers had.
The South Side is the place the Negro goes home to after working to earn his money in other parts of the city. When he gets there, he can lay down his burden of being a colored person in the white man's world and lead his own life. Mahalia Jackson.
Our race people also had banks, newspapers, and all kinds of stores and clubs. There was the NAACP, the Urban League, the Negro Fellowship League, the Socialists, and more, doing work against discrimination, lynching, and for the betterment of our race. Then there was the other element.
South State Street is in its glory. A teeming Negro street with crowded theaters, restaurants, and cabarets. Excitement from noon to noon. Midnight is like day. The streets full of workers and gamblers, prostitutes and pimps, church folks and sinners. Langston Hughes.
We call the streets from 31st to 39th a stroll. For people who indulged in a sporting life, there was plenty of it. White folks came to see our performers, and you all mixed together at the Black and Tan clubs. Some say not a single uplifting influence can be found on State Street. There was plenty of uplifting going on, though. And some of those wealthy Negroes felt they had to remedy everybody. While they do their work to uplift the less fortunate, they say we're coming in droves and shaming them with our Southern ways. What are we supposed to do?
We are our brother's keeper, whether we like it or not. It is our duty to guide the hand of a less experienced one, especially when the misstep of one weakens all our chances for climbing.
Some of the church ladies went on and on about the bad habits of those newcomers. Look here, I will refrain from wearing dust caps, bungalow aprons, house clothing, and bedroom shoes out of doors, as if we all had something wrong with us.
The hollering that goes on in front of their houses, on the streetcars, and in their Southern-style churches is unrefined and a disgrace to us all. They behave like they're still on the plantation.
Now, you know I got my bearings at the Olivet Baptist Church, and goodness knows some of our Southern ways might not exactly fit up here. But this preacher doesn't even know me. Might call my name in a book, but wouldn't know me otherwise. At home, whenever I didn't come to Sunday school, they would always come and see what was the matter. So now I'm looking for a church where I can sing without feeling strange, where I can understand all the words the preacher's saying. It's time to bring up Reverend Perkins for some down-home preaching.
There must be 100 Hattiesburg families living just a couple of blocks from where I'm standing. We're working at everything imaginable, and I hear about it all.
When I first came to Chicago, a friend took me to the stockyards. I wasn't here but 4 days, and I was making $5 a day. So you see now, I'm not going back south to work for no $15 a month. The packing house job means everything right now.
But sometimes it wasn't that easy, like getting to and from work. If you had a job in the steel mills or meatpacking plants, that's where the Poles, Irish, Lithuanians, and other immigrants lived. Their gangs would drag a race man off the streetcar just for talking too loud. Riding through there was the risk you had to take for being lucky enough to have a job.
I was a person that always had to have a job. My first job was a porter in a Palmer house. Had good times there, but not very much salary. When I got a little bit of age on me, I met my wife. I wanted her to think I was a regular man, so I got a job as a laborer in a foundry. One thing that impressed me was to look at that steel, that iron. All that I had seen before was all finished and hard. To come here and see it running like water, it was amazing. I used to skim and slag those furnaces and then tap them and pour that melting iron. It couldn't compare with crops that you nursed to growth and ate at your own table. You inhale that brass smoke and get what they call a chill. It'd be 90 degrees outside and you'd be there wrapped up in a blanket, aching and going on.
I heard Chicago was the only place where girls could get work in industry. The colored girls got the worst positions. I hated the stockyards. Smelly, cold, and dirty. The class of people there was pretty low. So when I got a chance to work in a mail order house, I took it.
Me and Aunt Clara, we're still working in the white woman's home. But only if we want to, doing day work. If we're not treated right, why, we pick up and find another situation. Can't nobody stop us.
Back home, one man took care to slaughter his hog, spent some time at it. Here it takes over 100 men, each doing a little bit of the job, while standing in the wet, freezing cold blood all day long. And if the killing floor is not rotten enough, they got us fighting about the union, too.
Some say it's the white man's union. Some say it's good for the race to join. If black and white workers are divided, how can they stand up to the employers, keep their jobs and wages? Our people were pretty full of hopes and disappointments, and fears. There were storm clouds gathering, trouble up ahead.
Is that you again? Now what do you want?
We hear you have acquired property. I represent the Hyde Park Kenwood Association. You are not welcome in this district, and we want to know what you plan to do about it.
What do I plan to do about it? I plan to live here.
The point is, we have spent a lot of money and we plan to keep this district white. Hyde Park enjoys too splendid a reputation as a neighborhood of white culture to allow Negroes to use it as their doormat.
I have bought property here and I am intending to live on it.
You'd better consider our offer.
There is trouble here, trouble everywhere. There is trouble here and trouble everywhere.
There seemed to be trouble everywhere. Strikes and violence in steel mills, meat plants, and streetcars. White gangs attacking us day and night.
I came home after serving 8 months in France. I might as well have stayed here for all the good it's done me. No, that ain't so. I'm glad I went. I done my part, and now I'm gonna fight right here till Uncle Sam does his. I can shoot just as good as the next man. I ain't looking for trouble, but if it comes my way, I ain't dodging.
If we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and penned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our accursed lot. If we must die, oh, let us nobly die, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Then even the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us though dead. Oh, kinsman, we must meet the common foe. Though far outnumbered, let us show us brave, and for their 1,000 blows, deal one death blow. What though before us lies the open grave? Like men, we'll face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying but fighting back.
We finally got provisions on the south side and could nourish ourselves body and soul. We had lots of mending to do. Many houses were ruined, so some folks had to move in with neighbors or kin. Some had to find space at the Negro YMCA. Anna Mae rode up to try and get me back to Hattiesburg. Sure was tempting. They started a commission to investigate the riot, whites and blacks on it. One thing was clear, though. We sure enough couldn't just sit around waiting for improvements. Our old migration club changed its name and became a voting club. Me and my church friends organized a block system, going door to door to get out the vote. Some men say we just trying to wear the trousers. But like the defender says, men may be good, bad, or indifferent, but women make everything better. So I said to Anna Mae, I'm going to stay right here until I have the right to live in peace. Thanks to our activities in the Black Belt, we've got record turnouts. Got Big Bill Thompson in as mayor and more black aldermen in the city government and state legislature.
Don't you see? Until the war, things been done to the Negro, with the Negro, and for the Negro, but never by the Negro. When they enlisted us to fight, they started something they won't be able to stop.
CJ and his friends, they call themselves New Negroes now, stirring things up here in Chicago and all the way to New York's Harlem. Returned from the war filled with pride and eager to show it, sometime too eager to show it. He act like we never did anything for ourselves before his generation.
Now that the war's over, we're just a bunch of cowards and jackasses if we don't use every ounce of our brain and brawn to fight against the forces of hell in our own land. Back to be lynched, bombed, and segregated, the black man fought to make the world safe for democracy. Now we demand that America be made safe for black Americans.
And if it ain't, I suppose you'll follow Marcus Garvey all the way back to Africa.
I ain't advocating going back to Africa. But Garvey's made us proud. And like the UNIA says, we've got to do more than just talk.
That's mighty pretty, CJ. And mighty hot-headed. You better watch how you talk and who you talking to.
Daddy, the time for whispering is over.
Let the blare of Negro jazz bands and the bellowing voice of Bessie Smith penetrate the closed ears of the colored near intellectuals until they listen. Let Paul Robeson singing and Rudolph Fisher writing about the streets of Harlem and Aaron Douglas drawing strange fantasies cause the smug Negro middle class to catch a glimmer of their own beauty. We young Negro artists intend to express our individual dark-skinned selves without fear or shame. If white people are pleased, we are glad. If they are not, it doesn't matter. We know we are beautiful. Langston Hughes.
No, you can see that the journey wasn't over once we got here, and it still isn't. Freedom here reminds me how they grazed a mule tied to a rope. He could eat the grass in a circle all around, but no further. Now don't get me wrong, sir. Weren't even allowed to have an ambition down south. Here we broke in new ground and cleared the path for the next generation. But still, like that mule, we're only allowed to go just so far.
Sure, we lost some things coming up north. And when the cold Chicago wind blows right through my bones, I remember the warm Mississippi breeze. With each streetlight I pass at night, the piney woods of home come to mind. But when I take a deep breath now, I know that old Mr. Williams is far, far away. It's free air I'm breathing here. Sure, it gets mighty cloudy at times, but it's still free air I'm breathing.